Whenever there is a parallel track conference, it makes me nervous that people would show up or not. But given that all of you are here, makes me happy and motivated to express with you my views on building a test engineering culture that I have accumulated over my 10 plus years of experience in the industry. And something that was not covered in the bio, I'm currently working as a director of engineering for Dow Jones. So although I have moved beyond testing as my primary role, but I'm still very passionate about the topic and how does it impact the overall software development lifecycle in any company. So that's what we are going to talk about. In my career, I started working for a consulting company in India, then I moved on to work for ThoughtWorks as an engineer, and then a small startup in New York City. So over the course of my experience all through these years, initially I was very happy and content that, yeah, I'm an automation engineer, I can write my BDD tests, I can make sure that my build is always green. And when I moved to my startup, like again, I was the only person and I could do anything, like whatever the best way I wanted to do it. But gradually, as I moved up and up in my career ladder, I found it very, very challenging to stick to those very basic things that Agile talks to you about testing. That you do TDD all the time. That's a very hard sell. Like in an Agile community, that sounds very common, but when you're in a real life scenario, it doesn't go well. And I can see nodding heads, so I can that it happens everywhere. And 2 years ago, I was moved to a position of director of test engineering for a 60 QA engineer team, and 80% of them were manual testers. Like, what do you do? How do you start building your test automation right way and not have thousands of tests? 50% of them are always red, and your build cycle is a day long. So, sounds familiar? See, so that's the struggle. I can passionately talk about all the automation tools, ways to write better tests, but I cannot sell it up in the my org that I want funding for this thing, because they're like, we're going to spend on the dev or we are going to spend on something else, not QA. Like I'm currently working for Dow Jones, and 2 years ago, they fired their entire QA team. 200 people out. So that's what happens. Like in a real life scenario, QAs are at the bottom of your priority list, and anytime if you have cost cutting, those are the first ones to go. So how do you build a testing culture so that you can fight with these things and still work around with the small investment that you have? You're not going to get a huge budget to invest on your QA team, so how do you work around that? So that's what we are going to talk about today. So every company, every business, every individual, every team wants success in whatever they are doing. So the reason we are all here, because we are all passionate about quality. A higher quality product would lead to a successful product, but definitely would not, you cannot guarantee your stakeholders that if you invest in QA, you're definitely going to have a successful product. But it can definitely lead you to that. So how do you build your case around investing in quality? So this is just a picture to give you an idea that anything that has a quality tag comes with a cost, whatever it be. So anytime you put quality in front of anything, you have to pay the price, and quality is expensive. And when we talk about investments in our team, I'm right now dealing with capital and budget for my team. Like it's insane, because like Dow Jones, we are talking about Wall Street Journal, and like it's a big media house. So you have to really fight for money to do technically the right thing. And I, like being a QA passionate person, I cannot even go and talk about the QA, because in the whole cycle, the dev and the front end and the DevOps stuff is still at the priority. So it breaks my heart, but that's the real life situation that we have to face. So what do you do when you don't have money? You don't do anything around QA? Or even if you take an example of a startup, like they are not yet funded. How can you expect them to spend in quality initiatives? So this is something we used to do in one of our ThoughtWorks team. It was not for QA, but anytime someone would swear on the team, they had to put $10 in the jar. So this is a good idea if you don't have money for your QA to have someone do it, but we used it for our coffee. So it worked for that, but not for a long-term project that you want to invest in quality. So how do you solve the problem? So this is something that I came up 2 years ago when I took over the team of 60 QA engineers, that how do you build that entire culture where I don't have to have brilliant technical QA engineers to help me build my test automation suites, continuous integration, and still use those like 80% of manual testers in my whole life cycle of my development and testing efforts. So that's why I came up with the term test engineering culture. It's what we are going to talk about today. I'm going to give you various examples that you can tailor to your requirements for your teams and for your scenario. So whatever takeaways you take, like whatever stage you want to start building your team, there is an example for you there. So what is quality? Before we deep dive into the test engineering culture part of it, what is quality? For every person on the team, it will mean something else. But as a QAs, we are always being taught, like, think from an end user perspective, because that's the most crucial person or piece in the whole life cycle. And still, big teams completely ignore that fact until the end of, or when they are about to release. So just to reiterate that we are all on the same page that what quality means. This is a picture that I put together. So the first thing, user experience. When the user quality points come to your mind, it's the user experience that's the main focus. Then we have speed. Everyone wants a site that loads quickly, an app that loads quickly. Like in New York City, we get a 4G network, but when I came here, this all on 3G. And I can see most of the US sites, the retailer sites, like they die in 3G. They won't even work. So you can see that how poorly those sites are written, and they are so heavy in their front end and JavaScript that they would just not load. Sorry for making that JavaScript joke, which I didn't intend it, but next up, privacy. Privacy nowadays is a very, very big issue. So for QAs, it's very important that they start thinking that as one of the primary factor when they are testing their applications. Definitely working features, site should be reliable and secure. Security, we are paying huge ransoms every day, every month when like sites are being held by these hackers. Like in US, a few months ago, someone took over the entire site of a hospital, and they couldn't work for a day, and they had to pay millions of ransom to get their system back. So a hospital website cannot go down. The patients would not get the treatment. They'll not be able to put any data. So security is a very important feature, and I'm glad that the previous talk highlighted the same thing. And some of the outside issues that are necessarily not, a user would not think, but as a QAs, it's important to think about resilience, scalability, maintainability, recovery, and testability of your application. So if we all agree upon that these are the main features that are important to us from quality perspective, we move on. So in the current scenario, most of the time, everyone should have heard about quality control and quality assurance, right? So that's what the roles and the titles many of the companies have. But what is the problem with this scenario? We put onus on a single person, a single team, that as a QA, if anything goes wrong, we'll blame you. And that does not work. So therefore, in test engineering culture, the first thing we say is avoid the frustration. Don't just rely on one person. And this model, these are the drawbacks that QAs are perceived as bug hunters, gatekeepers. There are thousands of UI tests that are most of the time read because of the hour-long builds. So therefore, we came up with the whole test engineering aspect, which the main things that it talks about: enable and support delivery of quality software by building infrastructure, practices, and a culture of testing. So when I say culture, that means your whole company is on board with this aspect. I know it sounds very ambitious on my part to say that get your entire company onboarded with this whole thing and then only it will work. But we'll see in our later slides that even if you start small and gradually show the impact, people will come and join you in this effort. So First thing is like quality is responsibility of everyone. It's not just an individual task. Everyone together in your team, and people often think that when we are talking about like, okay, QA is responsible, quality is responsibility of everyone, I'm just talking about development team now. We are also talking about your product people, your sales guys, your marketing teams, because those could be your internal end users that you can use to get the feedback, that early feedback. And even like, why not use your CEO if you're a small startup to get his feedback? Because originally he had the idea to build this company. He has been the founder. So he has the best use case of what your system should be. So get everyone on board on that thing. Make it an effort that is not just limited to your development team, but everyone that is involved in your company. I would even suggest if you have family and there is an app that they can use, get feedback from your family. You just don't have to limit it to your company people. So how does this changes the role of a QA engineer? I call it more as test engineer to align with the test engineering culture that I'm talking about. But whatever term you want to use, it's up to you. But as a highlight, what all role they play, as a developer, they are writing automation tests. And I've specifically called out pyramid because it's an important piece to decide what test to write, what level to write, and how much test to write. They are also the best product people that you can have on the team because being a QA on a small team, I've seen the product people will just give you the requirements initially when your iteration starts, and at the end of it, just seeing the demo. They don't play with the app as much as the QA does. So he's the best person for the product advocacy and write acceptance tests that also reflect the current state of your application. And end user, again, the biggest point that I was advocating in the beginning, they are the voice of the customer. They understand the customer most in the team. In my previous job, I used to work for a tablet-based company, and we were building a product for K-12 education, that is the school grade in US. And it was very difficult for my team to understand what a fifth grader would want in a tablet, or a teacher who has been teaching for 30 years would expect, because they are not there. They left schools years ago, and they have never been a teacher. So how do you get that end user customer perspective in that scenario? So one thing we always made sure that anyone who starting new, within 1 month, they would go and have a school visit. So it would call a field visit, and I went on a couple of them, and it was the best days of my life, because working with those third graders, fourth graders is awesome. Like, a teacher would not even know how to navigate on the tablet, and that kid would be like playing jelly beans in no time. So it's a completely different experience, and it gave my team that motivation required to work for that product and find the right features and make sure that we are uncovering all bugs for those kids and the teachers that are using our product in schools. And operations. So this is a slightly newer concept which recently has picked up, that QAs are not just focused on development and writing tests, but they are also the development gurus for infrastructure for their tests. So you're not just like on your machine, I have all my tests running now. We are setting up Docker. We are setting up through using Chef script to build up our environments. We are working in hand with operations people to make sure that all our tests in the cloud, there are distributed team. Like I have for Dow Jones, we have development team in New York, in New Jersey, in Minneapolis, in Hong Kong, in London. So you really need to have everything in the cloud. You cannot have your tests working on a silo machine. So that's a very important piece for us as test engineers to start thinking about. So let's get on to the real thing focus of this talk, that how do you implement a test engineering culture? And as I said earlier, there is a takeaway for everyone. So we are going to talk about 3 different scenarios about the stage of a product or a company or the size for the takeaways. So let's take the first example. When you're in a company, whatever size it be, there are multiple stakeholders in the team. And there are various beasts to handle. So as I said, one was like your project manager to convince that, oh, we don't have to release today. There are bugs in the system. Let's wait and fix those things. And he'll say like, no, I have already committed the date. So there you go. You have to fight for yourself. Or as I said earlier, you have to get budget approved for QA activities, for your test infrastructure development. Everything shouldn't go in your backlog that is pertaining to testing, which in most of the cases happens. It's sad, but it does happen all the time. So you feel like a lonely person out there trying to climb a mountain, and you're struggling with it. So therefore, we are defining various levels that will help you to climb this ladder and mountain with the smaller efforts, and not trying to hit the problem with one bang. And therefore, and many a times, like this is a very common problem when people come to a conference, that they take away that, oh, this is something I learned at this conference, and I'm going to start using it for my team. But it does not, and you tried it for a few months, you were able to convince your project manager, but it didn't work. The reason being, the solutions that are provided are often applies to a specific group of people. It needs to have some prerequisite, but at the end, that one solution does not work for everyone. It's not like you cannot just go and like, oh, I heard this topic in the conference, I'm just going to go and apply it to my company. Don't do that. Even from this talk, don't try to do that. Tweak the solution pertaining to your problem so that it applies to your scenario more realistically, and not just like, because I'm talking about maybe Dow Jones and Amplify, but your company might have other challenges. So try to grab what would work for you from the next slides. So let's talk about various teams and different levels of the product. So first, we'll start with a startup that is preparing for first launch. They don't have a live product yet. They don't have real users, and the team size might be just 15, 20, the entire company. Very real life scenario, right? Like many of you people might be working in startups that they just got their Series A funding, and they don't have real money as such, but they are gearing up for their first launch, and they want to make sure that the first few users that they get, they like the product, and they stay on the product for a long time. So what all you can do from test engineering perspective to make sure that you have a high quality product. So we have an idea. That's what in place of product we have, because it's not a live product. So the most important thing, TDD. I have been fighting for this TDD concept for last few years at different companies. As I said earlier, like when you move from that perfect agile world, which when I left ThoughtWorks, I realized like everything doesn't work that way. For every engineering practice that agile talks about, you have to fight in your teams, because no one is going to buy it right away. So TDD is that one piece. So I tell my developers like, okay, you cannot write tests first, but let's make sure you write tests after you have written your functionality, and try to keep that test coverage 85% and above. But even for that, it's a long fight. It's not that easy to come thing. So never think that, okay, I'm just doing my initial launch. I'll not worry about unit tests at this point. I'll do it later. If you cannot do TDD, which is not so good, you should try to do TDD, because it's not just unit test coverage. You're getting more and more quality, your design thinking, everything is influenced by that if you do test first. But if you cannot, that's fine. Still try to do keep your unit test coverage of 85% and above. And next is testing. You necessarily don't have to have test engineer at that level. If there are product people or business people in the audience, it's something I would suggest that it doesn't mean that if you don't have money to invest in test engineers or QAs, you don't do anything around testing. Use everyone that you have within your company as testers for your product. For every demo that you are doing to your internal users, like just let them do a quick test hackathon to just go and test the entire site. Whoever finds a bug gets a treat. So you can like come up with cool ideas to do that, but invest in real exploratory testing at that time. Frequent releases. Agile talks a lot about that you should release as many times as you can, and this is the perfect stage to do that because you don't have any real users. Even if you break something, you're not gonna impact your business. So try to release as many times as possible at this stage because you're getting that early feedback from your system that when you release, how is the whole release process goes, what you need to fix, how are your environments. You can learn a lot of things at this stage. So frequent releases, continuous integration. I have seen teams that have until we get like 1 million users, we'll not invest in this thing. Like this is a very early thing for continuous integration and invest in Jenkins or TeamCity. And they never end up doing that because now their systems are so big and they are getting more and more users that they don't have time and money to spend on continuous integration. So that's another thing that you should start doing from the very beginning. Even though like if you find that the licenses are expensive for continuous integration tools, that there are free ones, try using them, but have a system in place because it will help your entire development team to share code and build those initial best practices that is gonna pay you in the long run when your product gets successful. Code reviews. This is another important piece from Agile that you should always do code reviews. For a smaller teams, it's much easier because you have few people. You necessarily don't have to do pair programming because many teams think that your velocity will go down if you do start pairing. So if you're not doing that, code reviews is the best way to share knowledge, to build those initial code-related best practices in your team, and at the same time to get that feedback and share the experiences of people that you have on board with you. And feedback. As I was mentioning earlier, if you don't have real users at this stage, which you would not, try to get some alpha beta users or try to get feedback from anyone in the company, your friends, family. If it's a food ordering site, we can start giving them test accounts and you can get that feedback from that early on. And so the last point on this slide is about data. There are many people who think that, and let me take an audience poll, that does data comes in for a small startup? Like, do you think about data when you're at early stage of a startup? Very few, right? Because people correlate data as something that is only meant for when you have thousands or millions of users. And then they start thinking about like, okay, now we have so many users, what should I start collecting? What cookies I need, what beacons I need to put in place? So, but that's too late because you have already missed the opportunity to learn so much from your initial set of users. And that second change, that second big revamp of your platform that you were planning to do, you don't have data to drive your decisions. So whether it be small, like very few things that you're collecting as feedback, as data from your users, but have that initial set of data in place that you want to collect so that it helps you building the next set of features and implement those and backed by your actual users' data, not just some of your assumptions. And trust me, like it's gonna make a huge difference because US elections shows that people just don't, your polls are not correct and what you were thinking is not always right. Users will see things in a completely different way. So the more data you're collecting even at early stages, it's gonna help you in the long run. So this was about a small startup which hasn't launched a product. Now we move on to the second stage. Your company is slightly bigger. Your product is live. You have a couple of thousand, 50,000 or 1 million users on your site, and you're doing well. So what's the next step in the test engineering culture to establish? So at this point, it's a very good idea to hire a small QA team. And we'll continue to do whatever we were doing for our small startup with one tweak that you shouldn't be releasing on a daily basis at this stage. This might sound anti-agile that you're not doing frequent releases, but the reason being that as a company, as an engineering team, you're not yet that mature. You don't have few of the things that would allow you to recover from anything if it goes wrong. And you don't want to hurt your initial set of users because those are the valuable customers that you have that you got in your first round. So at this stage, do weekly releases, not on a daily basis. Have your test engineering team in place. Think about automation pyramid tests, at what level you need to make investments. Manual regression. Agile people often assume that Agile means everything should be automated. No, you have to invest in manual testing, because when you are continuously building new features, although you're automating along the way, maybe or maybe not, but your exploratory and manual testing is going to tell you a lot about your application. And the scenarios that you haven't thought, like just from moving on from one machine to another machine from one browser to the other, is going to tell you that there are hidden bugs that you can find. So always do some level of exploratory testing for your system. For continuous integration, move on to automated deploy. Start thinking about privacy and security that we talked about earlier, and also the user experience, the important pieces that we discussed, what matters to a end user in terms of quality. So this is kind of very close to what I'm doing right now at Dow Jones, because we are a big company. Wall Street Journal site was launched 20 years ago. And there are people who are still within the company when the site was launched, so they have been there for 20 years. Which is a good thing, and also a bad thing, because they have been doing things in a way for last 5-10 years. The technology has evolved so much. So that's what the challenge I'm facing right now, that how do you introduce some of the new concepts with that team? So that could be another full talk, but for now, we'll see what all things I'm trying at this scale, because even for me, it's like first time working at such a huge, with such a huge engineering team. We are 1,000+ engineers across the globe. So, and working on, like I was told, we have like 25 client application and 65 server-side applications. So we're a big company. So how do you introduce all these challenges? So again, I'm doing it one by one with a small team, piece by piece. So let's look at it quickly. So most of the things we are still doing. And the few things that we have, again, like the releases part, what we had at the initial startup launch, we have introduced it again. But now what makes it more comfortable for us to release daily is because we are doing dog fooding. We are doing alpha beta releases. We have monitoring and alerting in place. So many times people think monitoring and alerting is for DevOps people. No, if you do it the right way, and as a test engineer, if you understand what all benefits it provides, you can learn a lot from it. So I used to work for a startup which they used to serve travel ads on websites like Orbitz, Expedia, cheap tickets in US to sell flights and hotels. So for that team, what we used to do is, like, if our metrics would go down, we'll put an alert on the system. Like if we had a 10% drop in our user, 20%, 30%, it would alert us at a given point to tell us that, like, the release that just got out has introduced some bugs and our user traffic has dropped. And we'll right away know that, okay, something has gone wrong. And we would, because we do small releases, it's easier to find out where the issue was, because we are dealing with a small set of commits. We don't have hundreds of commits to scan, like, okay, this might be problem, this might be problem. No, I just pushed out 3 commits. The commit message was very clear to me that this is what all changes were introduced, and I could find out what went wrong, and I can revert that change. So smaller releases, reduce your dependencies. If you have, as I said, like multiple server applications, multiple client applications, don't release everything in one go. Try to break out your releases, and your contract test could be your best friend here. Like, establish contract tests for all your dependencies. So you don't have to make that, okay, this version went out, I have updated this version, will this work with the other version that is already live in production? So make your versions backwards compatible, and being able to test those dependencies early on in your release cycle. And the last piece in this is the crowdsourced testing, which is a very new concept. I'm not sure how many of you are using or have heard of crowdsourced testing? Yeah, so still very new, and this is something that I learned when I joined Dow Jones. So It would be surprising for many of you that with 1,000+ engineers, we don't have even like 10 people QA team across the company. There were 300+ people who were fired 2 years ago. So we are relying on crowdsourced testing. And I was initially very skeptical of the idea that will it work, will it not work, but it's working. So we rely on our developers to do most of the unit testing and integration testing. For some teams that really need domain knowledge, we have vendor QAs helping us. But for most of the applications, like Wall Street Journal is a public-facing site, and we have millions of users. So to get the best way to get feedback on multiple browsers, multiple operating systems, multiple devices, we are using a service called Applause, and it's working great for us for all our applications. Like across the company, we use them. And it's not very seamless in terms of like people would say like you're not doing your in-cycle testing. I get that point, but we have our, as I said, the alpha, beta, and the dogfooding part. So we use our internal editors who are editing the content on a daily basis to provide that early on feedback. And we use our crowdsourcing partner to test all the platforms before we do a general availability for all our audience. And we also use feature toggles to turn it off for majority of our users before a release, and just turn it for 10%, and then an incremental increase for entire audience. So this is all the things that you should consider when you have a big company, a big team, and not just have like that focus on just like, okay, I'm just going to automate with this automation tool and have like try to get 100% coverage and try to run all my tests on different browsers. Like it's much beyond that. Start thinking about the holistic picture instead of just that one thing about automated tests. Cool. Questions, thoughts, ideas? We have sadly 3 minutes left, but I'm happy to take any questions. Yes. Yeah.
My question is...
you get the microphone on? Go ahead. You shouldn't have to touch it.
Yeah.
My
Bring
question
it
is... It's not...
It's good.
It's good. Yeah,
right,
bring it closer.
Yeah. So in my company, they are using feature on and off toggle buttons. For example, sometimes we don't have enough time to test any feature, and then they really want to go live with off state. Is that fine, or we just still need to postpone the release date?
So if they are using the feature toggles the right way, your code should not creep outside the toggles.
Yeah.
If that part you're confident about, then there is no reason that why you should not. So I don't know if there are people from Facebook here, but that's what I read. Like Facebook does not, they don't have a real QA team, but they rely heavily on the feature toggles and dogfooding. So that allows them to continuously release on a daily basis, but still not impacting the actual audience. And I think like many big companies use that.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi there.
Just a question.
Yeah.
Do you think TDD works?
So if done right and with the right mindset, it works. You need to have a lot of training. I have seen developers completely transitioning from I hate DDT to it works. But it's just that you need to figure out how to do it right. If you're not doing it right, that's why you have those questions in your mind that it's not working. But it's difficult. It's not easy as people say that, okay, from now on we are going to do TDD. It doesn't work that way. You have to really invest in it, and it really needs a lot of training and commitment to do it. 58 seconds left. Question at the end.
How you doing? Thanks. So I'm kind of in I think you mentioned earlier, I'm in a very similar situation where I was hired as like basically the first QA engineer and kind of working on a newish product. And we've since grown to a team about 6 engineers, which is great. Yay, QA. But when I was hired, an interesting thing kind of happened where everyone was like, oh, we have QA now, so we can just stop testing. And it's kind of like been entirely absorbed by my group. And so, you know, as an engineering leader, I'm trying to figure out where to reinsert myself and what the appropriate place to bring quality up in the product development stack, if you will, is. And I'm curious what your experiences have been with that.
Exactly same. Like the startup that I was talking about, like I was the first QA, and the product people was like, where is our QA? Where is our QA? And the day I arrived, like, now this person is going to do everything. But I'm happy that, and in a way it might be a coincidence that many of those engineering teams were ex-thought workers, and so they shared my views, which I'm not saying is the only workaround that you have, but try to show them benefits on a gradual basis. Like, if you do this with me, let's pair, let's try to improve this in this way, and maybe show the video of my talk. Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was lovely talking to all you guys. Thank you.